Good evening, everybody. Welcome into the Villanova Basketball Report. Bob Long, Kevin Long here. We're excited to be here for what should be a great evening talking Villanova hoops. And the Villanova Wildcats, a huge win against Xavier and propelled them back to the top of the Big East standings and now tied with the Musketeers of Xavier. And listen, this was big, Kevin, because people were saying this could be the end of the Big East as we knew it in terms of it being Villanova's conference. They still haven't lost an outright regular season crown, but it was the Musketeers that were the biggest challenger. And as we saw, Villanova dispatched of the Musketeers 95-79. And we're going to talk right on that whiteboard behind us about how, even though he didn't get all the playing time in the world, how Eric Paschall coming back was big in that respect and really in that first half contributed to a big portion of their output and their scoring. So, Kevin, first of all, your thoughts on what you saw this weekend.
Yeah, so absolutely a big game for Villanova this weekend to really establish themselves as still the top dog in the Big East. It would have been very, very difficult for them to come back had they lost that game. So great win for the Wildcats, bouncing back from that Providence game that we'll get to in a little bit. Saw some good minutes from some of the young guys. We talked about that on the show last week. It was nice to see Samuels get some solid minutes in there. Colin Gillespie scoring some points. He looks a lot more comfortable right now. That's going to be a big key for Villanova moving forward. I really liked what I saw. Jalen Brunson seems to be taking on a little bit too much at times. He's not the same player as he is with Phil Booth out there on the floor. Sometimes he looks like he's trying to do a little bit too much. Like him to stay within himself. A very good passer, very good scorer. It seems like at times with Phil Booth out, he's trying to be a little bit too much of the scorer. But overall, a good week for the Wildcats. We seem to have Xavier's number. That was a great win for Villanova this weekend.
Yeah, the only time that Xavier has beaten Villanova was that game out at the Cintas Center. It was 2 years ago when Villanova was the number one team in the country and Xavier was number 5. And Xavier put 90 points on the Cats that day. This day it was Villanova putting 95 points on Xavier, earning the victory over the Musketeers. But Trayvon Blewett still, he hasn't traditionally had great games against Villanova, but still, even in a loss, continues to make his case for first-team All-American, continues to make his case for National Player of the Year, at a point where Trae Young starts to drop back a little bit, as Oklahoma drops back, of course. No guy, I believe it's less than a 6 seed, whose team was higher than a 6 seed has ever won National Player of the Year. Trae Young obviously flirting with that because he still continues to put up outrageous numbers, and Oklahoma continues to lose.
Yeah, he's certainly been struggling along with the entire Oklahoma team recently. I think that was probably a season low he put up on Saturday. I believe it was 11 points. Obviously a great player, but a team, a surrounding cast that's just not doing a whole lot for him. Trayvon Blewett, I would think, has to be right up there in the discussion right now, if not the top guy in that discussion. At no point in the game does Xavier really feel like they're out of any game because they have Trayvon Blewett. Villanova was really starting to pull away at times. Even early in the first half, Villanova could not miss. Really starting to put the game away early. Trayvon Blewett just seems like he can hit a shot from wherever he is, whenever he wants. And he just really kept him in that game. He's a really versatile player. He can beat you to the basket. He can hit a three right over top of you. A lot of ways that Trayvon Blewett can beat you, and I think he's got to be the number one candidate as of right now on a very good Xavier team for a National Player of the Year.
Bob Long, Kevin Long here on the Villanova Basketball Report. We talk about the Cats after, a good rebound to a midweek struggle against Providence. Turnovers and a lack of assists are what categorized that game, Kevin. I believe 8 assists, but the 19 turnovers, neither of those numbers are good. The 19 turnovers is a killer. A team averaging just around 10 or a little bit above per game. 19 will kill you. You put that together with a lot more assists against Xavier. And, of course, that helps when you hit some shots and you score 95 points. There's more field goals to be assisted, of course. It's not rocket science, but it's a much better balance. It's a much better look. And, of course, the three-point basket's going in. So Providence, we can talk about that briefly because I think Villanova is a completely different team standing here tonight, and they'll be even more different on Wednesday as they expect Phil Booth to come back in some way, shape, or form. But they're different, and we're different on Saturday than they were on Wednesday. But a quick point about Wednesday. Quick thought about the Providence Friars. Tough to beat at Dunkin' Donuts Center. They've beaten a lot of teams there. They've also slipped up there. A loss to DePaul, a team we'll talk about tonight as well, is really highlighting some of their struggles at times at home. But Creighton, Butler, Xavier, now Villanova all go down at Dunkin' Donuts Center. Probably the top 4 teams in the Big East. So Villanova, while they didn't play well, you also give Providence a lot of credit. Jay Wright said the exact same thing, that Providence came out and played a good basketball game. I'm thinking one Wednesday ahead, Kev, because DePaul comes in this Wednesday to the Wells Fargo Center.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I was going to make that point as well about the 8 assists. That's not as alarming to me as the 19 turnovers because they just weren't hitting any of their shots and therefore not getting any assists. But the 19 turnovers was definitely alarming at the time. We were struggling for ball handlers. Eric, his first game back from his concussion. He's a big ball handler for us. Colin Gillespie still trying to find his feet at the time. Those guys played a much, much better game versus Xavier. And, obviously they were hitting a lot more threes, more shots in general. But it was crucial to have those guys back. So I agree with you. This team is completely different than it was back then, even just Wednesday. And then, if we get Phil Booth back, man, just like we talked about last week, now we've built up that depth where we've gotten guys like Jermaine Samuels and Colin Gillespie those minutes that they need to get comfortable. And now, you get Phil Booth back, and then all of a sudden you're 8-9 deep. If you get a guy like Cosby Roundtree back in the mix. So overall, I think this is going to be a blessing in disguise for Villanova. That's as long as Phil Booth comes back 100% healthy for March. But overall, this team is already looking a lot better than they did on Wednesday versus Providence.
Phil Booth, we mentioned possibility to come back against DePaul on Wednesday night. That's an 8:30 tip at the Wells Fargo Center. On the other side of the equation here, we turn our attention to the Xavier game, really the game of the year in the Big East, the game of the weekend, and one of the games of the year nationally. And with that stage on the Fox Broadcast Network, which, as we've said, has just been a phenomenal thing for Villanova on broadcast television. Fox will always get more viewers than ESPN, quid pro quo, in terms of just who has access to it. They've had a bunch of games on Fox. This was the highlight. This was the one that was being advertised all week, really all month long. And to some extent, it delivered. Xavier crawled back into the game in the second half. Villanova, after hitting 11 threes in the first half, Chris Mack said, Kev, 8 of them were well contested, which I don't know if that's exactly true, but some of them were very difficult shots that Villanova made. 11 made threes in the first half, and then they start 0 for 7 to begin the second half. And Xavier starts coming back. Villanova at one point, Kev, was 0 for 5 in the second half from 3 and 4 for 4 from 2-point field goal range. And Xavier was still coming back, and maybe Villanova got a little bit chuck happy, as I think they probably were in the first, but masked by the fact that they were hitting those threes. And all of a sudden, Xavier's back into it, 62-59, and then the play. Paul Scruggs reaches over the top of Omari Spellman. A foul is called. Again, I don't know if there was really enough to be a foul call there. And then Omari Spellman gets in the face of Paul Scruggs. And Chris Mack, I think understandably, very upset that there was a double technical called there rather than a foul on Omari Spellman, because as you saw him, if you were reading his lips, he said, he went after my guy. That's baloney. Mm-hmm. And I think he's exactly right. And he talked about it in the post-game press conference that that's where the game turned. To some extent, it did. I mean, they went basket for 2 minutes, and then Villanova started to go off, got it to about 11, and it didn't get much closer than that the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm. And that seems like a fundamental issue throughout all of sports right now. You see that a lot with penalties in football. You get flags on 2 guys who are getting into a scuffle, and you get offsetting penalties, and no one's to blame, no one's hurt, no 15-yard penalty. it really just needs to be a mindset change in all of sports. You need to get the guy who instigated it, give them the penalty. That's really the only way to stop this stuff from happening, because people know, hey, if I get in a fight, the other guy is going to get penalized too, and it's all going to come out in the wash. Same thing in this situation. Double technicals, no free throws taken, no harm, no foul. So, it's something that needs to change fundamentally with sports. But as for the game here, it was pretty amazing to watch in the first half when they just could not miss. I mean, you have Mikura getting right up in the face of Mikal Bridges.
Yep.
And he did not care.
Just on the catch, just rise up.
He had no idea that there was, someone, Mikura size, probably 6'5", long, lanky guy. He had no idea that anyone was even there. He just shooting it right over him, getting a lot of bounces our way. I think it was in the second half that, shot clock was winding down, and rebound comes out to Dante DiVincenzo. He just pops it right up.
Yes.
Right in for three. That's just kind of the way the game went. The bounces were going Villanova's way. It was really something special to watch. They're controlling the ball a whole lot better. Gillespie looked a lot more comfortable. Jalen still looked like he was struggling a little bit at times. I think he needs to, kind of reset and find his comfort zone. He's still in the mindset of, oh, no, Phil Booth, I have to take everything on myself, when his supporting cast is getting better and better. Paschall is now back and healthy, and Gillespie is getting better, and Samuels is getting to a somewhat reliable point. So he needs to sort of take a step back, go back to being his normal Jalen Brunson. And, this team is going to do good things in the next month here.
All that said, he still started to take over in the second half. When those threes weren't going down, he went back to his traditional fake the handoff and get to the right wing, get into the post. It's great. They had the coaches mic'd up as well. And for those of you that have been watching the show all year long, he said, watch Brunson. He likes to fake the handoff and then stick out the hip and become a post player. He's been watching V's and O's all year long. Chris Mack, look at that.
All over it.
Good to see you. Sorry about the loss. You're still going to have a great run in March. You got a hell of a basketball team, Coach. But in all seriousness, he went back to that. He was fairly successful. And then running the high ball screen with a combination of Paschall and Omari Spellman, I thought was very successful in the second half of the second half. So while it wasn't his best game, like you said, he still had big buckets when it mattered. And a guy that maybe hasn't had as many great games as, say, Jalen Brunson, but who showed up is Colin Gillespie. Mm-hmm. And Colin Gillespie has showed an ability now to get to the hoop. And as we're going to talk about in V's and O's, there's a big difference between driving to the middle of the floor versus driving baseline. And we'll talk about it with the markers and with the board itself. But Gillespie still at times is a guy who caters to going to the baseline rather than to the middle of the floor. And it won't be rocket science, but it opens up a lot of space. And we'll talk about which guys are really good at doing that versus which guys maybe aren't quite there yet and why, and how Gillespie can and has gotten into trouble. But I think about one play in particular, Kev, where he went baseline. Clearly there was some tape watched because Xavier double-teamed there. And as the big flashed out, I thought it was Paschall, but I'm not certain. The big then followed him, and Gillespie stutter-stepped and then dove to the hoop, getting enough room to go down the baseline. So that hesitation got him where he needed to go, and he finished underneath the basket using that as a defense against the shot block. Mm-hmm. That, as well as the drive to the hoop, the finger roll, that was right down the middle. I thought he played a lot better and has been very efficient from three since he's come back. So it's nice to see. Phil Booth is going to get a lot of time. I thought the broadcasters did a great job of breaking that down as to how and why his time will be reduced, Gillespie, but that he has grown up considerably. And we talked about that a couple shows ago, saying it's not going to be fun. It's not always going to look pretty. You have to believe that this kid has it and let him make the mistakes he has. There will be more to come. Don't anybody forget that. But he's doing a good job out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just about not thinking so much for him. A guy's, freshman, true freshman coming in, thought he was going to be redshirted, then came back, was ready to play, gets injured, coming back from an injury now. he's got to be thinking a lot at this point. So when you're thinking a lot, you're not playing fast. You're playing much slower because you're thinking about everything deliberately as you're doing it. Now he looks a lot more comfortable out there. He's got a nice quick first step, which we're finally seeing. He had a nice drive to the basket, got open along the baseline like you were talking about. So he's doing some good things. He made a few shots, which was definitely encouraging. You want to see a lot more of that from him. So it's definitely very encouraging to see him doing more. And back to the Jalen Brunson thing that we were talking about before, even though he may have struggled at times in that game, if it got down to it, and it wasn't a particularly close game at the end, but if it was close at the end, in any game really, you still want Jalen Brunson with the ball in his hands, no matter what. You want him being the guy driving to the hoop. You want him backing someone down. Occasionally hitting a three here and there. He obviously has a very good shot, but I trust Jalen Brunson taking the ball to the basket more than I do anyone doing anything else on this team at this point.
A live look here at the Big East standings. The Xavier Musketeers still have that half-game lead over Villanova, so they'll make that game up over the next 2 weeks, Kevin. But Villanova, right there, tied in the loss column with those 3 losses. They have 1 less loss overall, and with the 2 wins over Xavier, would have the head-to-head over Xavier and thereby claim that regular season crown. Who does Xavier have left? Well, there they are. Wednesday, the 21st of February. That is tomorrow. They play Georgetown on the road, an early tip. And then the following Wednesday, so they have this weekend off. That's where Nova makes up the game. They'll play Creighton. And that could be a tough game for Villanova. We'll talk about that. But Providence is who Xavier plays. And then, of course, on the road at DePaul on the Blue Demons senior day in the first year of that arena. Nova, on the other hand, and this is the Villanova schedule, tomorrow they will play DePaul at home, followed by on the road against Creighton, and tough trip to Seton Hall. That team's going to want to take Villanova down, and then the home finale against Georgetown. So that is not going to be easy, Kev, for these Villanova Wildcats who sit tied right at the top of the standings at 11-3.
Yeah, it's a tougher schedule for Villanova coming up for sure. The Providence game is really the only one that I see being a challenge for Xavier moving forward. Maybe Georgetown on the road, DePaul on the road. You just never know. Maybe DePaul shows up to play and, a long travel for Xavier to go to DePaul. You never know. Maybe DePaul could steal one there, but Villanova needs to win out right now if they want to continue their streak of regular season titles in the Big East. And, those games at Seton Hall and at Creighton are really going to be difficult. Seton Hall, they came out ready to play. They were firing last time at the Wells Fargo Center. I'd be surprised if they didn't do the same, maybe come out with a little different strategy coming up for that game. And then going out to Creighton, going out to Omaha, Nebraska, always a tough chore. It's going to be a long flight for the Cats, and you need them to come out firing. We'll get more in-depth into that game later in the show, but really need to win out. I really don't see Xavier losing at any point. I know we just lost to Providence on the road, but I think Xavier takes care of business versus Providence at their own place, and DePaul and Georgetown they should dispose of quite easily. So 4 big games coming up, and Cats need them all.
There you go. Villanova Basketball Report here on BLS. Bob Long, Kevin Long. Eric Paschall back for the Wildcats. We talked briefly about his impact. We're going to talk about it at the whiteboard in our next segment from an offensive perspective. But defensively, well, first of all, he struggled. 4 fouls halfway through the second half. Not great. He's kind of that way whether he's just came off injury or not, to be quite honest with you. He's one of those guys that, in a nice way, is sort of like one of those wind-ups, the toys, where you just let him go, and he'll just dart at you, whether it's you should back off and play good defense or just kind of run at the guy. He, at times, is a little bit too aggressive, and I can appreciate that. You see that on the offensive end. It's a big part of the reason he's successful. Sometimes you also scratch your head. A couple of those fouls, you're left scratching your head.
Well, now he has a valid excuse.
Right,
He's
no,
coming off a head injury, so that's what it was the whole time.
But in the second half, the back tap, when they were up 5, something like that, and then there was a great high ball screen executed by Xavier. They tried to throw it over the top to O'Mara, or was it Thomas? I'm not sure. I thought it was O'Mara, but obviously he had Colin Gillespie beaten. Just it was a great toss, and Paschall comes over the top, tips it away, keeps it in bounds, and Villanova's in business there. That led to only one bucket, but it was late in the game. They took off about 25 seconds on the second possession, and Eric Paschall, playing with 4 fouls, came up with 2 of the bigger defensive plays of the game. It's what you love to see. It's what depth does for you as well. Depth, tough word for Villanova to even encounter this year. But a little bit of depth and a lot of energy coming from Eric Paschall. He was great defensively.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell with Eric whether that's, great defense or if that's actually poor decision making. You don't want to play him too tight when you have 4 fouls at that point. You're a crucial player. You need to be in the game. And sometimes that doesn't seem to matter to him much. He still goes out, plays the same way, makes the same dumb fouls here and there.
Right.
So, he needs to be more careful when he is in foul trouble like that. But credit to him. He played good defense, got away unscathed without any more fouls. It really came up big in the last few minutes of the game there.
Defensively, he's a bull, and offensively, he is a bull. And we're going to talk about the bull in the China shop. Right on the whiteboard behind us, we're going to explain why Eric Paschall coming back has been so important for the Villanova Wildcats, and which of the guys we see have that initial instinct to drive baseline or to the center of the floor, and why that matters. We'll be right back here on the Villanova Basketball Report on BLS.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation. Our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
People ask me why I'm giving up a year of my life to help kids. I say, who says I'm giving up anything?
If kids who drop out are 8 times more likely to end up in prison, do we open more prisons or minds?
Welcome back, everybody. It's time for V's and O's here on BLS. Bob Long, Kevin Long. Excited to be alongside everybody talking Villanova basketball. And let's talk about the Wildcats and the return of Eric Paschall. Eric Paschall, one of the keys to this team, and we mentioned in the previous segment the fact that with 4 fouls, he's still playing with aggressiveness defensively, causing back-tap opportunities, serving as that guy to protect the over-the-top lob when a smaller guy in Colin Gillespie, after a liberal switch, as Villanova always likes to do, is having to front that big man. Paschall providing that over-the-top presence you need. But offensively, Eric Paschall, even though you think he's 250 pounds, a big guy, doesn't really have that true back-to-the-basket game and is an excellent ball handler. So where he excels is out on the wing. And the Wildcats, as always, will be in blue. Eric Paschall starts out over here, Jalen Brunson up here, and maybe you have Mikal Bridges down here, Omari Spellman over here, and let's just say Dante DiVincenzo here. Here's what's so great about Eric Paschall and what he provides this team. He loves to dribble to the middle of the floor. So if he starts over here by Dante, let's say Dante is now Eric Paschall, he likes to drive to the middle of the floor. Rather than going baseline here, where you can collapse a second defender, make things difficult on the Wildcats, and really make things difficult on Eric Paschall, he's much better driving to the middle of the lane. And here's what that does. You get a defender right here, usually a guy that maybe is a bigger guy and can't really handle the quickness of Eric Paschall. So this defender is trailing, trying to get here. Paschall can either beat you to the basket all the way to the hole, which he does extremely well. He can rise up from right here and shoot over top of somebody, especially if a defender is late or if a smaller defender happens to be covering him on that particular play. Or what he can do is draw a second defender from here. So maybe Dante DiVincenzo's defender has to come in and guard, or Jalen Brunson, his defender tries to crash. All of a sudden you have all these opportunities for one of these other extremely talented offensive players to find a way open. Dante DiVincenzo is going to be my big example right here. Dante DiVincenzo, more than anybody on the Villanova basketball team, is an excellent back cutter. So Dante DiVincenzo can either step back and hit a three, or he can cut to the hoop and finish really strong off the glass, or even dunk the basketball. We've seen him do that many, many times. So let's run this the other way around. Dante DiVincenzo and Eric Paschall. Paschall's going to now switch sides of the floor. Paschall is over here. DiVincenzo, actually, we'll put him on the baseline. Why don't we? DiVincenzo will be here on the baseline. Paschall drives to the middle, guarded by this defender right here, who follows him in. DiVincenzo's defender is here. Paschall beats that defender, even just a little bit of a hedge by this defender coming this way. DiVincenzo can either flash to right where Paschall was at that right wing and fire away, which he did multiple times, or just zoom right there, back cut baseline, and catch the ball either on a lob or on a back cut, bounce pass to the baseline. Paschall, again, he's a guy that will have 4 and 5 assists on a good day because of his ability to get into the middle of that defense and be so excellent in terms of committing a second defender or simply beating his defender off the dribble. Now, the next concept, though, is talking about the fact that Villanova, while they are very successful dribbling that ball into the middle of the defense, there are still guys, and some of them are younger guys, who still elect to go baseline. And it's very limited in his opportunities, but Jermaine Samuels still does that in the rare opportunities he has the ball, because Samuels is usually going to be over here when he catches it, and he has one of two things he can do, really three. He could outlay it to somebody, send it down low, something like that. He can get rid of the ball, or he could dribble towards the middle like Paschall does, but more often than not, he's dribbling down here, committing a second defender, especially against his zone, and then all of a sudden Villanova's in trouble. The other guy that does that a lot is actually Colin Gillespie, the backup freshman point guard who may see a little bit less time now that Phil Booth is coming back, and we expect to see him on Wednesday, but it's worth bringing up because Gillespie, and truly more so, I'll actually say that Gillespie's on this side because like many great point guards, especially some that have come through Villanova, Kyle Lowry, etc., he is a righty, shoots the ball, certainly can dribble with the right hand, but is more comfortable going to his left. So Gillespie likes to come this way to the baseline, and a lot of times will jump at the baseline to throw a pass to Mikal Bridges. A couple times, including against Xavier, that has been intercepted. But what he did well against Xavier, and I'll call it bailing himself out, is he got to this point, two defenders came down, a big here and the guard that was guarding him. But as Eric Paschall, I think it was Eric Paschall, popped out here for what could have been a decent look, that defender followed, Gillespie double shook the guy, right? He hesitated, and then he came underneath the basket and finished. So it's not necessarily something that Villanova should be doing, and as we see here, dribbling the ball to the middle of the floor, albeit not rocket science, has represented most of the opportunities for Villanova, especially when it's a big like Eric Paschall. He's very, very successful of getting into the lane. And then if you don't pick him up, I think of a big dunk against Seton Hall, and there are several like this, he will just throw it down on you. But if you commit a second defender, he's a good enough dribbler, he's a good enough passer to find guys in open positions. And I mentioned DiVincenzo, the best back cutter on this Villanova team. It's a 1-2 tandem that we haven't seen as much as maybe we'd like this year, as Dante really was not in that starting role. Perhaps he will be as Phil Booth starts to come back and those two see the floor a lot more together. So that's our V's and O's segment here tonight, and we'll be back on the other side. We are going to welcome Tom Trainer, who will be calling in the last 20 minutes of the show to talk a little bit more about Xavier, that Big East race, Phil Booth coming back, and, of course, some big matchups coming up next week, and our Pick'em game where we're coming down to the wire here at the end of conference play. See you on the other side.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
What's going on, folks? This is Bob Long from Bob Long Sports. We're live here at the Wells Fargo Center before each and every Philadelphia Soul home game. We record this now before Arena Bowl 30, and the Philadelphia Soul, the winningest team in Philadelphia. Bob Long Sports is your spot for live video pregame shows with Bob Long, Eric Nash, and Rob Stott. We even have the opportunity to talk with the AFL Commissioner, Scott Butera. We appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me. You do a terrific job, and God bless all of you and the folks in Philadelphia. I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Tune in before every home game for the Philadelphia Soul official pregame show on Bob Long Sports.
Ford is Mayfair's neighborhood Ford store.
Nobody knows your neighborhood like Dunphy Ford.
Nearly 40 years.
Right here on Frankfurt Avenue.
Generation after generation, our neighbors continue to be our customers. We have access to the cars and trucks you want with financing you need.
Dunphy Ford is Northeast Philly's first choice for America's #1 brand. 7700 Frankfurt Avenue in Mayfair. Online at www.dunphyford.com.
Come experience the Dunphy difference. You'll be glad you did.
Welcome back, everybody. Villanova Basketball Report here on BLS. Bob Long, Kevin Long. We'll get back into this. Of course, the X's and O's that we just talked about on the board behind us, but we're also going to welcome Tom Trainer in just a few minutes, get his thoughts on the big week that was. What did you think of the concepts you saw back there on the whiteboard, Kevin? And how was Villanova either done a good job, or where do you think the areas are in it for improvement? What did you take away from that segment there?
Yeah, so my takeaway, talking a lot about back cuts, guys being in good position, starting in the middle of the floor. These are a lot of the things that you'll see, your veterans, Jalen Brunson and Phil Booth doing some of those things. Colin Gillespie starting to get a little more comfortable with that, as well as Jermaine Samuels, maybe not handling the ball, but there were several situations where, ball was flying all around, ends up in, Jermaine's hands down by the rim. There are a few instances where he got a couple easy lay-ins from that, just from, executing a proper back cut. You'll see Dante DiVincenzo do that a lot. Eric Paschall will get himself open on the elbow or up by the free throw line a lot. So it's good to see some of these young guys starting to do this a little more. Demir Cosby-Roundtree, didn't see a whole lot of minutes out of him over the past week, but, his development is still coming along. We'd like to see him do some of those things as well. He's a little different animal where he's really the only back-to-the-basket type player that we have on the team. So, would like to see some of that stuff happening with him, getting in position. It actually does seem like Colin and Jermaine are starting to take that leap ahead of him. But really good, really encouraging to see guys like Colin and Jermaine starting to think a little better and play a little faster as they're not thinking so much, actually.
What say you? What says the listening faithful out there on the Villanova Basketball Report? I mean, what's the issue with this team? Or maybe there's no issues whatsoever. Maybe they get healthy. They get Phil Booth back coming this week. Eric Paschall showed exactly why he was really important against Xavier. And maybe they're back on the right track and they're the best team in the country. But if there is anything that this team may need to improve upon, what is it and what do they do well that will propel them through March? We talked about the schedule on the previous side of our break, the fact that they have a game against DePaul and then Creighton. That's going to be a tough game. Anytime you go out to Omaha, very difficult team. Kyrie Thomas, you have Marcus Foster, a phenomenal backcourt that they have there for the Blue Jays and Greg McDermott. And Villanova disposed of them the first time at the Wells Fargo Center, played very well against that team. And I don't know if we're going to see that again. I think back to the days of Ethan Wragge and Dougie McBuckets and the fact that they made things very difficult on this Villanova team for a couple years there. In fact, it was subject of the trivia question for Tom, where they had beaten Villanova 3 times in a row, and who was the last team to do that before Creighton? That was Pittsburgh, all the way back to the 10, 11, 12, I believe, time frame, right before they left the Big East. And that 2012 game was actually College game day at Villanova, where Malik Wayans had hit a 3 that would have tied the game, but it was a half second after the horn. That was the last time that not the last time they played, but the last time I believe that Pitt had beaten Villanova. So back to Creighton, back to DePaul. Anything to worry about this week, Kev?
I think, again, what we saw from the Providence and Xavier games this week was, this team lives by the 3 and dies by the 3. Not that they can't drive to the lane. They certainly have guys that can do that. Pretty much everyone can do that. Dante's very good at that as well. Jalen's very good at that. They just choose to take these threes a lot because they're very good at it. And that's the only problem is if you're a little bit off and you're missing a lot of those shots, it's really going to show. It's not, when you're driving to the basket, not much changes a whole lot. But if you're just a little bit off with that shot, Villanova can beat themselves. So I really don't look for something that DePaul or Creighton can do to beat Villanova. It's really just a matter of the Wildcats beating themselves. And if they come out and they shoot like they did against Xavier, then, there's not many teams that can beat them in the entire country. It'll be a tough game for anybody if Villanova's hitting shots like that. So, just look to see the Cats come out early, hitting a lot of shots. And if they do that, I think they're in good shape for this week.
A look at the newly released top 25, and we'll give you the top 13 here as it relates to the Villanova Wildcats. Number 3 overall in the poll. Michigan State above them in the AP poll. Of course, number 1 in the USA Today coaches poll. That's just nuts. I mean, that is just nuts. This is a team that struggled against Iowa, struggled against Penn State, although Penn State is showing themselves to be a decent team. And then they trail by 25 points on the road at Northwestern. The team crawls up into a shell. Okay, we can give Michigan State a little bit of credit, but we're going to put this Spartans team back at number 1 after they beat a Purdue team that's shown itself to have lost then 3 games in a row when they had lost to Michigan State. Again, it sounds like I'm poo-pooing everything that Michigan State has done. I'm not. They're the 6th best, 7th best team in the country. That's not bad at all. They're not the best team in the country, at least not right now. Do they have the talent where if they were to put something together by the end of the year, could they win it all? Sure, they could. But right now, this is not the best team in the country. They're not playing like it, and they don't deserve it based on their body of work.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, Bob. I really don't see that. I mean, Virginia has handled their business very well. I don't know what their win streak is at this point. But
well, they 1 or 2 because they lost to Virginia Tech.
Right, sure. Last week, that's right, or 2 weeks ago now.
But, yeah, they're only lost in the ACC.
Right, exactly. So, obviously an extremely strong conference. You have North Carolina, back on their way up, Duke back on their way up. What seemingly was a tough year in the ACC. Now, you're seeing all these teams come out of the woodwork, very strong, Louisville's a good team, obviously. All the sanctions and things like that.
Did you hear that news today?
I did.
They have to vacate the national championship 2013. And not only that, that is so far from the biggest story. Mm-hmm. They have to give back millions of dollars in NCAA units, they call them, for having won and advanced in the tournament. So that's 6 units the year they won, as well as I forget exactly how many other years were involved in that. But they're giving back millions and millions of earnings, which, listen, that money's come and gone. They've spent that on facilities. They've spent that on many different things, marketing, etc. They built a new arena. I mean, I think the Yum Center actually came just before some of this success. But they've put a lot of funds out there and a lot of money to invest in things, and they got to give back millions upon millions of dollars. They'll be able to do it, but it'll hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you remember just back to 10, maybe 15 years ago now, a team that was in Conference USA, a relative nobody. You usually would see their name in the tournament. They're a decent team, but moving up to the Big East very quickly, conquering the Big East for the most part. Obviously, a lot of other good teams in there as well, Syracuse, Pitt, UConn, teams like that. But we're really one of the top dogs, if not the top dog in the Big East, and then they move over to the ACC. This all happens within a 10-year span.
Right.
This isn't all that surprising to hear something like this coming out, that, you're using, recruiting players, things like that. It's not the most surprising thing that I've heard. For sure, building up all their programs at this point. The football team, the baseball team is always in the College World Series now. So, disappointed to hear something like that, but definitely not surprised with a school that sort of shot up as quickly as they did.
Next up here on BLS, we welcome our other co-host who, listen, his day job is making millions, being a basketball coach and drawing up the X's and O's, and he is very nice it's nice of him to give him, about an hour a week to us, and then some. He's got a lot to prepare. He's got trivia questions to come up with, and he's got pick'em scores to tabulate, which he's got for us in just a few minutes. But Tom, we're one, excited to hear about how things went tonight with your basketball squad, and two, excited to talk some hoops.
Hey guys, how's it going, Bob and Kev?
It's great, man. How about yourself?
Tom?
Good. Glad to be on the show. Sorry, it has to be a call-in tonight, but happy to be honored to be a guest on the show tonight. The game, I think it was the best game our girls played all season. Just to give everybody a little background, I'm helping as an assistant coach for the St. Thomas of Villanova and Our Mother of Good Counsel 7th and 8th grade girls varsity team. They're playing in a little end of the season President's Day tournament at St. Philomena's in Lansdowne. And tonight was the semi-final game, which is why I'm not able to be on the show with Bob and Kevin. And the girls fought hard. Like I said, I think it was the best team effort of the night, but it just wasn't enough. Got away from them a little bit in the last few minutes of the game. But what can you do? They'll have a consolation game on Saturday, which will be fun, kind of a last hurrah for the season. So looking forward to that.
That's good. Good to hear. Well, we're scrolling through some unique and some old school pictures of the Villanova basketball teams, and then Chris Jenkins hitting the three in 2016. You have the Rolly Massimino teams, you have the 2016 team, all these Villanova teams over the years that have achieved varying levels of glory. And we've talked a lot, Tom, about how good this year's team can be. And I think we were unanimous in saying that we thought it was a blip and not necessarily a downhill fall here for this team, especially with Eric Paschall and Phil Booth. We asked the question of Matt Traybold about how good this team is relative to some of those other teams we're talking about. So on Saturday, as you absorbed what was a 16-point win for Villanova over Xavier, what were your thoughts and what were your takeaways from that game?
Well, I did get to hear a little bit about what you guys have talked about already. I'm sorry if I'm repeating some of what you have said earlier in the show, which I wasn't able to catch. But one thing that I heard, especially Kevin mention, and what the first statistic that people always point to after a Villanova loss is typically the three-point shooting, right? And that is something you can point to against Xavier. Against Providence rather. They were 13 of 20 against Xavier, 16 of 34. So obviously a huge discrepancy there in shots taken and shots made, percentage made. But the number I immediately point to, and again, forgive me if I'm repeating something you might have already said, but the number I immediately looked at is turnovers. The Cats turned it over 19 times at Providence. Jalen Brunson, uncharacteristically, I don't know if he's ever had 7 turnovers in his basketball playing career. Since he's been 6, 7 years old, I don't know if he's ever had that many turnovers.
Right.
So he had 7 turnovers. Conversely, against Xavier, the entire Wildcat team had just 6 turnovers. So, you're looking at 19 turnovers versus 6 turnovers. And Jalen had 0 turnovers against Xavier. And I think that's the ballgame in my mind. Shooting, that comes and goes. That's something that obviously having Phil still out, hopefully he will be back, within the next week or so. Having another player in there, that does help tremendously when other guys aren't firing. You can, having Phil, that extra guy off the bench, you can count on him, So if it's not Dante, if it's not Mikhail, if it's not Jalen, it could be Phil. And then the other thing in the Xavier game that I was super excited about and talking about really making this a complete team was Colin Gillespie. Was not just the fact that he scored in double digits in a hostile environment in the Cintas Center, but that it was the way he looked at doing it, the confidence that he had driving to the basket. He had some really great hustle plays, but just the confidence he showed in that hostile environment, really stepping up. I know this is something that we've talked about on the show before. Would these injuries to Eric and Phil prove to be a blessing in disguise? And I think, not to jump, to conclusions already. It's too early to say for sure, but I think we're already seeing growth out of Colin Gillespie in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about that a little bit early on the show as well, talking about how Colin is playing much, much faster now, not thinking as much. It definitely looked a whole lot more comfortable out there. Now, Tom, I want to go back to what you were talking about about the three-point shot. So we're talking about how Villanova lives and dies by the three. So as a basketball coach yourself, would you change your philosophy at all based on the way Villanova played against Providence? Now, obviously, they did a very good job against Xavier. Not a whole lot of turnovers, made a ton of three-point shots. But when you get into March and you're making those deep runs, you can't have one of those games that you have against Providence. So
sure.
In order to make a deep run into this tournament, would you ever consider, if you're Jay Wright, maybe changing your philosophy, trying to get to the basket more, and stop relying on the three so much as a whole?
Well, me personally as a coach, I think in basketball the first option is to get the ball inside and you work from there. Jay's philosophy has worked for the Cats thus far. As you alluded to, Kevin, they do have those hiccups, unfortunately, once in a while, late in the season, in March. Where they don't shoot it so well. But there is something to be said for the philosophy that Jay Wright and his coaching staff have run, the culture they've built at Villanova. You can't make it unless you shoot it. And I think it also and then on the other, another thing it does, it gives your players a great deal of confidence when you are putting that confidence in them. And I think Jay is one of the rare coaches where you will see, we might be sitting in the stands, putting our coaching hats on and saying, oh, why did so-and-so take a bad shot? Why is so-and-so doing this? Next possession, Jay might be yelling at whoever it is, Dante, Mikhail, saying that they need to shoot the ball more, or why did they pass up that open shot? And it does hurt, on nights where you are off. And like I said, I think it will help a great deal having Phil back, because they just have so many weapons once you get a guy like Phil Booth back. That it helps when other guys are off. But there is something to be said psychologically for giving your players that confidence, so they don't have to hesitate, they don't have to second guess themselves, and they can just shoot freely when they are open and step into the shot with confidence. And I think I want to add, sorry, just real quick, that I think a great opportunity, however, to see them work the ball inside would be against the Creighton Blue Jays this weekend. So that was a game at the Wells Fargo Center where the Cats made a ton of threes again and shot a ton. They shot 39 threes against Creighton earlier this season. Fortunately, they made 19 of them. So the stat that I want to look to in that game is the fact that they had 35 rebounds, out-rebounding Creighton 35-25, and the turnover, there wasn't a big turnover differential, but those rebounds and offensive rebounds, that's why Villanova got 17 more total shots than Creighton did in that game. So I think that tells you, I mean, Creighton isn't a big team this year. They are primarily a guard-heavy
especially
squad.
with the injury down low.
Exactly. And so I think this is the perfect game, Kevin. If you were going to see the Cats really work on getting the ball in the post, establishing themselves inside against Creighton this weekend would be the time to do it.
They do get I mean, I hear everything you guys are saying. They do get the ball inside. A lot of times that just leads to, threes. Now, are there times where they get a little bit chalk happy? Yeah, I think that happened a little bit at the start of the Xavier game. A lot of times their penetration leads to open threes because the defenses crash on guys like Mikal Bridges or on Jalen Brunson, and at times even on Eric Paschall when he got into the game. I think, we talked about Eric Paschall, Tom, in the V's and O's segment, the fact that him being able to handle like a guard and power like a big, and especially his affinity for getting to the center of the floor, why that opens so many things up. Now, when they're not playing well, sure, I think at times they just pass it around the top of the key, but they also keep the defenses off balance, and I think that's something that at least we should toss out there. But Tom, I don't know how you're going to run this from the phone, but it might be time for Pick'em. What do you think?
Sure, let's do it. Yeah, let's get to it. So coming into this past week, Bob had a huge week where he scored 63.5 points, leaving him at 59.5 points to Kevin's 15.5. So you're both in positive figures. So we went from, I know if we're using that golf analogy again, we went from the U.S. Open at Marion to U.S. Open at Congressional, with Rory
and then
McIlroy
the John Deere
or something. Yeah, exactly. So we've changed courses here in that regard. But Kevin, I'll start with him. He picked some very interesting, what ended up being very interesting and exciting matchups last week. He picked Seton Hall over Xavier, who was favored by 5.5 points. Now, that was a game that was very similar to what Villanova did to Xavier on Saturday. Xavier doing it this time to Seton Hall. So they got sort of a taste of their own medicine, came out firing, and Seton Hall, really got punched in the mouth and looked startled. And Trayvon Blewett goes off for 37 points, 8 threes, can't miss. And then Seton Hall does cut it to 6 late in the game, but it was too little too late at that point. With all that said, Xavier did win 102-90. Sorry, that's 102-90 points. Covering the spread, negative 6.5 points for Kevin. And then he picked Nevada over Boise State. Great pick by Kev there, as Nevada has now emerged to a 2-game lead in the Mountain West and that big Mountain West battle. Boise State was favored 1.5 points. Nevada wins 77-72 at Boise State, so plus 16.5 points there for Kevin. And then Mississippi State over Vanderbilt, a really exciting matchup. Unfortunately for a Mississippi State team that is hoping they're on the bubble, hoping, one of those SEC teams that's on the bubble, but unfortunately falls to Vanderbilt as Riley LaChance hit that buzzer beater 3 for Vandy to win 81-80.
What are the LaChances, man? Unbelievable.
I was
done.
watching that game knowing my pick was on the line. It was like,
did you see? I don't know the
What's the
player's
swing?
name.
That's a 13-point swing, right? For you in this game?
Yeah, probably a 13-point swing.
Yeah,
10 plus 3.
Mississippi State was up 80-78. Yeah, and then a 13-point swing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, it ends up being a push for Kevin. No points on that one.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right, because it was +1.
Right, because it was +1 for Vandy.
I thought I might have had a half point in there.
But you would have had 13. Yeah, they were a 1-point favorite was Vanderbilt. Shockingly, but Vegas apparently knew what they were doing because that's what it was. But I don't know if you just real quick, I don't know if you guys saw that. I forget the player's name from Mississippi State who was on the free throw line. He made his first free throw to make
Yeah.
it 80-78,
Missed the second
and then
one.
kind of taunted the crowd. Told them to be quiet, and it was so obvious of
Smart.
a taunt that the announcers made note of it. And then what does he do? He goes on to miss the next free throw,
Hit your free throws, man.
giving Vanderbilt. So celebrating too early there for Mississippi State, and unfortunate for Kevin.
All right, how'd I do?
Deserving to come off
All
the
right.
bubble.
Well, and Kevin finished. he still finished, thanks to Nevada. He still finished with +10 for the week, plus 15 and plus the 15.5 he had coming in, so he's at plus 25.5 right now. Bob, the leader in the clubhouse, coming into the week, picked Maryland over a 2-point favored Nebraska Cornhusker squad. Nebraska won by 4 points, 70-66, so -2 points for Bob. But, and man, you really should get penalized for this pick. This one hurts. It's got to be bittersweet for you, Bob. More bitter than sweet, I would imagine. But pick the Providence Friars over our Villanova Wildcats, who were a 10-point favorite. Providence wins 76-71 as the Wildcats scored the lowest point total they had all season since the Bahamas. Providence gets a plus 25-point score for Bob in that game. And then he picked Clemson over Florida State, who was favored by 2.5 points. Florida State wins 81-79, but Bob still picks up a half point.
Give me that half point. Give me that half point.
I need every point you can get. So Bob ends with 23.5 points for the week, leaving him at 83 points total to Kevin's 25.5.
That's right.
It's still
it's a ball game.
Within reach, Kev.
You never know. Bob picked up 50 in a week. So
that's right.
Never know.
Let's hear it, Kev.
All right. So, in an attempt to come back here, made a few picks. My first one, I have the Kentucky Wildcats +5 over Arkansas. At Arkansas, I like the way the Wildcats have been playing recently. I think they win that one outright. Next one, Seton Hall plus 1.5 over Providence. To be completely honest with you, I was making my Big East pick of the week, and I was trying to pick the St. John's Marquette game to only find out that Bob had earlier in the day selected that game. So,
yeah, there's really no good underdog here this week.
No, there's no good underdog.
I didn't love the St. John's pick.
I don't like – I mean, this is my pick, and now I'm saying I don't like it, but it's Seton Hall plus 1.5 at Providence. Villanova just lost at Providence. I wasn't impressed with the way that Providence played this weekend, so I like this Seton Hall team. Desi Rodriguez, hell of a player. Miles Powell, a lot of good players on this team. So I'm rolling the dice there, saying maybe they cover and upset. Next one, Texas +3 over Kansas State. I know Kansas State has played very well at home. Mo Bamba's having a good season for Texas. They came through for me in the past, so I'm going to roll with Texas again.
All right, there you go. I like Texas Tech, a 1-point dog on the road at Oklahoma State. That team's 3 games over 500? Get the heck out of here. Texas Tech, not looking ahead to Kansas this weekend, takes care of business on the road in Stillwater. San Diego State, +1 against Air Force. What the heck is going on the Midwest to West Coast swing with all this home court advantage stuff? Air Force is a 500 team. San Diego State's pretty darn good. Actually, Air Force is under 500. San Diego State's a decent basketball team. They win that game handily. Then the one I don't like, again, I don't think there's any good underdogs in the Big East, but you can't possibly pick a favorite in the Big East under this current point system because the conference is just nuts, and you don't want to put 10 points on the line by picking a favorite. So I had to go St. John's +5 over Marquette. What do you think, Tom? Give us something.
All right. Hey, good picks. I like the Texas Tech pick, especially. I don't think they'll be looking forward to that Kansas game. I'm glad you mentioned that game because if we did a game of the week, unfortunately, we don't know what the spread is on that game yet. It's not till Saturday, but it would be that Texas Tech Kansas game. Can't wait for that one. Will this be the year that Kansas finally goes down in the Big 12? We will see.
Well, listen, if they have another 35-2 free throw advantage like they did against West Virginia, I like their chances.
Yeah, that helps. That helps for sure.
All right,
Shall
so
we do some trivia?
We may. The issue is you on phone can't have my Jeopardy music. Kevin, you can sing if you want, or you can sing, Tom, whatever. Or we'll just go with it. What do you got?
All right, well, we have – I am not going to sing, but all right, I got your question. Here we go. I got 2 questions. We got two questions again for you, Kevin. Well, actually, this is one is a leftover from last week, but
Just
I'll go
in
with
case
the
I
one
don't
that.
get the first one again.
Yes, exactly.
I appreciate you considering me.
Mata.
And we'll go with the one that pertains to this week first. So you had mentioned one of the first things I first heard when I was able to pull up the show after getting home was mentioning that Ethan Rogge game, as we've mentioned multiple times from 4 years ago at the Wells Fargo Center. My question for you, and this is honest, I completely understand this is just going to be might be a shot in the dark. I don't know how well you remember that game, but my question is simply, how many threes did Creighton hit against Villanova that evening to set a Creighton basketball program record?
Yeah, I think I remember. Okay. I'm ready.
I'm going to see if I can get the Jeopardy music on my phone.
Oh, there you go. Put it up to the microphone.
Well done.
Yeah, there you go. I got it.
That's about all I got.
You're going to have to keep it there.
Well, I got to answer the question.
All right. Tom, what else?
What, do you have an answer?
So.
Oh, okay.
So we're just looking for the number of threes that
That's
Ethan
right.
Rogge hit, not
No.
the
Rogge.
entire team or
Team.
team. Okay. Okay.
You got it? All right, what do you got?
Mine's purely a wild stab here. I'm going to say 21.
Yeah, and I had 19, Tom.
21 is correct.
Wow! Hey!
Kevin, well done.
Wow! Get excited. Get on your feet.
Hey, you want bonus points?
Can I? What's that worth in the
pick'em? How many
pick'em?
Ethan Rogge had, or you want to just stop on top?
Do I
Stop while
lose
you're at it.
everything if I guess wrong? I'll guess 14.
No, goodness. I thought he had 8 or... I'm going to go with 9, Tom.
9 is correct, and Bob takes it back. Oh, no.
14?
Sorry,
what are you,
Kevin,
nuts?
I don't know, who knows?
42 points on threes?
Kid was on fire.
Yeah, I shouldn't apologize. 14 is, that's, I mean.
You never know. You just never
All
know.
right. Well, move it here. Here's your shot.
It
to,
seemed like that at least.
That's fair.
Here we'll go 2 out of 3. Here we go. So, last time on the show, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, we talked about Mikal Bridges reaching the 1,000-point scoring mark.
Mm-hmm.
This question is simply, who, out of Jay Wright's players, who has the most points in Villanova history that it was a Jay Wright recruited player?
Oh, Jay Wright recruited.
Yep.
Huh. Oh, it's
A
tough.
Jay Wright player.
Yeah.
And
Right.
then
Right.
bonus,
Oh.
if you can just closest to guess on how many points that is.
Oh, man. Okay.
Just a guess.
Just for fun. Just good times. All right. I guess I'm ready. Again, I don't...
Kev?
Yeah.
I'll go with me first here. All right.
Well, I was just asking if you're ready.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to go with Scotty Reynolds and, geez, number of points. I want to say he got 2,000. I'm going to say like 2,200 points.
All right. Give me one. See, because I'm thinking him too. I don't know who else it would be. So I think it's...
I only have one other answer that I could possibly think of, but
Yes, you can say it if you want. So you said how many points? 2,200.
I said 2,200.
All right, I'll go Scotty Reynolds 2199. But
Oh.
no. I think he's probably somewhere around like 2,000 on the button or like 1918, something like that.
The only one I was considering was Randy Foy.
Yeah, but I don't think he was a J recruit.
Was he not?
Or maybe he was. That's why I didn't answer him. Tom, what do you have for us?
All right. Well, it didn't matter whether Randy Foy was a Jay Wright recruited player or not, because Scotty Reynolds is the correct answer.
Hey.
Ding, ding, ding. He sets second in Villanova's all-time leading scorers behind Kerry Kittles.
There you go.
With 2,222 points.
Wow, you were right on it. Oh, baby.
Kevin, well done. And how is that for a number? 2,222.
Yeah.
2,222 points for
really
Scotty Reynolds.
That's pretty good.
That's well done there, Kev.
Thank you.
You did your homework there.
I really did.
That's
studied
great.
up for this show.
Good stuff. Good stuff, gents. Great show tonight. Enjoyed it. The game this week, by the way, DePaul at home, 8:30, second to last home game. Get out and watch. Fortunately, I won't be there. It's unfortunate, but I'm going to be down at the Palestra for the high school basketball doubleheader. Bonner Prendy taking on a really good Archbishop Carroll team. And then St. Joe's Prep, surprise Newman Goretti, and they'll take on Roman Catholic. Winner of that game will get the top overall seed in the 6A in the District 12 for the state tournament. So that has both PCL and state implications. Should be a lot of fun, but I will be following along. Villanova Wildcats at 8:30, and then a big one on the road in Omaha on Saturday against Creighton Blue Jays. So, Tom, appreciate you calling in, man. It was good stuff.
Yeah. Great to talk to you guys, as always.
So, Kev, thank you. Good show tonight, my man. And guys out there, remember your V's and O's. You can go back and watch the V's and O's. We cut it up into a separate clip as well. Driving into the lane creates the space. Wonderful back cutters with guys like Dante DiVincenzo. And the fact that Eric Paschall provides that new facet to the game. Keep looking for that, and we'll probably, hopefully, if he gets enough time, break down some Phil Booth tape next week as well. So, once again, the Villanova Basketball Report on BLS. Tom Trainer, Kevin Long, Bob Long here, saying so long. See you next week.